You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Monster House presents.
Monster Talk's a proud member of the Airwave Media Podcast Network, home of such shows as Kick-Ass News, Movie Therapy, and Therapist Uncensored. If you'd like to advertise on this show, contact sales at advertisecast.com.
It's actually quite unlike anything we've ever seen before.
A giant, hairy creature, part ape, part man.
In Loch Ness, a 24-mile-long bottomless lake in the Highlands of Scotland. It's a creature known as the Loch Ness Monster.
Monster Talk.
Welcome to Monster Talk, the science show about monsters. I'm Blake Smith.
And I'm Karen Stolzno.
Today's episode is a little bit of catching up with Blake and Karen, but it's also a light introduction to a class of monsters that I've been procrastinating about talking about. I like Monster Talk to cover subjects with more depth than your average YouTuber or podcaster or self-published cryptozoology author. And while editing this episode, I kept thinking about this class of topics that I've been putting off. The monster, or maybe it's the monsters that we're going to be talking about today, is the Wampus Cat. Now, as a lifelong resident of North Georgia, I've heard mention of this animal many times. Even today, I had lunch with my parents, and I asked my dad, who also has lived here his whole life, about the topic. And he said, I've heard about them all my life, but I've never met anybody who claims to have seen or heard one, nor do I know anyone who claims to know someone who has seen or heard one. But yet, they're around. The stories are around. Still, I know I heard my grandmother mention them, and they certainly figure into Appalachian folklore, but they're also an indigenous legend of the Cherokee. And if you do any research in folklore books or on the internet, you'll also find statements that a Wampus Cat is either the same or similar to the water panther, another indigenous legend. But is it? Even as I edited the episode, my brow furrowed in worry that the confusing interplay of legends from multiple cultures may have put a deep understanding of this topic out of reach. I don't know why I get so caught up in this, but I like to find out what the source of a story is, as though that's the real story. But how do you do that when the source comes from a time before the originating culture had written language, and the stories likely were shared across multiple tribes for many years, and the cultures in question used stories and dance and arts in ways that would be changed irrevocably with the coming of colonial Europeans and their religions? And the pioneers would appropriate parts of these stories to explain their own experiences and sightings. So whose Wampus Cat story do we tell? Is it a creature of flesh? Is it a mythical hybrid? Is it a made-up story to scare children into safety? And how much of the original story is left, and how much is repurposed witch and werewolf lore recast as American frontier fantasy? I don't have easy answers to these hard questions, but Karen and I decided to at least start the conversations today, and I wanted to reiterate my concern that a complete conversation about this topic and similar classes of monsters warrant an extra level of effort to help give the context that's often missing. It is this complexity that has kept me off of talking about the Wampus Cat, the water panther, the wendigo, and the puckwudgie, and it's also kept me from talking about the indigenous lore of the skinwalker, except to say that whatever a skinwalker is, it's got little to do with the so-called Skinwalker Ranch. Stay tuned, because I'm going to try and get the right experts on to help us get a better understanding of the role that these creatures play in their original cultures, as well as how the stories have been taken up by paranormal enthusiasts and others. To be clear here, my constraint is a personal one built out of a wish to provide content that is good enough for my own weirdly exacting tastes. But in the meantime, here's a conversation about Wampus Cats, and like the proverbial elephant, it's a big meal and we can only take one bite at a time.
Monster Talk.
All right, Karen, it's good to hear your voice, but for the first time in a long time, I can actually imagine talking to you in person because it's fresh in my mind from having actually happened.
Indeed, yeah. I think that was the first time that we've caught up face-to-face in about 4 years.
Yeah. It's a strange way of working, but it was,
Even still, we didn't get that much time together because everything was just a flurry of events, and we had family with us as well. So, we didn't really get to spend that much time together.
But what are we talking about? What did we just come off of?
I guess we should clue everyone in. So, we just came back from a trip to Jacksonville, Alabama, where we had been invited to talk at Jacksonville State University by a friend of the show, Tanya Sasser, who's an instructor in English at JSU.
Yeah.
She invited us to come and talk to her students and to basically talk on campus to anyone who was interested in attending.
Yeah.
And that was just a lot of fun to talk to her students who are students in podcasting, which I think is a relatively new subject at university level, because when I went to university, it certainly wasn't available.
So we've done these kinds of university programs a few times now, and they're really delightful. And so obviously, and I guess this is where we should say, if you're interested in having us speak at your university, please reach out to us, to Blake@monstertalk.org or Karen@monstertalk.org. We could probably arrange something. But
absolutely, we love things like this. Love meeting, instructors and teachers and professors and students, and it's like a kind of think tank.
It really is.
Days.
It's great. It's great. And exactly. And you get to hear how people are using your topic in their classrooms, and almost. I guess ever since we went, I guess our first one was Texas Tech in Lubbock, and that was David Perlmutter who arranged that. Thank you, David. And
it was a lot of fun too.
At that time too, similarly, they were people in the communications department there instead of the English department, but same idea of people learning how to do the business of podcasting, how to do the writing of podcasting. How to work through this very dynamically changing ecosystem, but and we also get to talk about monsters. Yeah, so
how to incorporate monsters into the mix.
Exactly.
Indeed. So so during this visit, I picked up a cold, which you can hear, and we also went out to lunch with Tanya and some of her students, and that was really enjoyable. Just great to hear what people are working on, and so at one point, Tanya mentions the WUMPUS cat.
That's right.
And I'm like, the whatus cat?
And I was ashamed.
You all about it. Like, it was all about it.
Well, it's not quite my stomping grounds, but certainly I grew up at the sort of foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, and that kind of lore is more north of here, but it's definitely something I heard about growing up, and my grandmother had talked about it.
I think it's spread around the country too, because in discussing this with Matt, he said, "Oh, have you ever heard of the term kitty wampus?"
That's right.
Like, no.
Yeah. Yep.
And what does that mean? So he said it was a term that his parents would use to talk about something being chaotic or disorganized. It seems like it's linguistically it is really spread, and there seem to be lots of different names for this particular cryptid as well. Not only the Wampus cat, but I've heard of Wheelie cat. I like that one, and Gallywampus, and a few others. I guess it depends on the region.
It does, and as we'll discuss, I think the complexity and the number of ways the story has spread, I think is a product of a lot of different sort of cultural things going on. So on the one hand, you've got these stories are part of indigenous North American tribal lore, but
originally,
but and it's a set of stories that probably were already interplaying pre-colonial. So like in the North, there's a version of this kind of animal that's very tied into what we would probably hear about as water panthers. They've got a bunch of different names for these, but it sounds weird because I think coming from a sort of Western tradition, the idea of a water cat doesn't make a lot of biological sense, but it was a very powerful sort of supernatural, mythical force that I think, in the simplest parallel, would say it's kind of like the water horse, where it had
the Kelpie.
Yeah, so it's one of these monster in the water that has a prescriptive kind of, be careful. It also has
cautionary tale.
It also has sort of an explanatory value of like someone, this fierce warrior, good swimmer somehow went out in his canoe and then disappeared. That's not natural. It must have been, this animal that did it, that kind of thing.
Attributed to that, yeah. We've talked a lot about alien big cats, and this is not only something that found or not found in North America, but also in Australia, and it seems to be another one of those universals, these cats, often panthers too. It seems like in Australia the belief was that these were panthers that were brought in by perhaps American soldiers during World War II. So often it's an animal that is not native to the area and is introduced somehow and has become a problem.
And I think the term has gotten muddied up quite a bit because pioneers would use that term to refer to any sort of mystery sound. If you heard like a weird noise out at night, that's probably just the Wampus Cat, and that
it's a coyote or a.
Well, yeah, it could really be a lot of things, but as a story, I think the Wampus Cat, just is an answer. My mom used to always do a thing where she would have quick answers, then if I kept pressing her, she'd say, "Go to the encyclopedia." And so Wampus Cat would have been, that's probably just a Wampus Cat. It would be like one of those
Google
kind of
is your friend,
right. So
the original version of that, yeah.
I mean, obviously, it's a monster that I was aware of, but the reason I didn't want to tackle it, quickly, and I really feel like this is maybe a preliminary episode on this, is because the way the monster has evolved over time and been spread from culture to culture means there's kind of a lot of sort of sticky issues to kind of work through. It is very much something, there's sort of this idea, I think I first saw it sort of codified in a book called Complexity. And it's this idea that, if you have a complicated system, it might have sort of come to be from a lot of different angles. And it's really impossible to work out from the pieces, where did it come from exactly, unless you have a lot more information.
Yes.
So in biology, you could take two species that aren't related but seem to have some similarity, or maybe they're related, I should say, but they're not closely related. And you can look at their DNA, and you can actually sort of figure out molecularly where they diverged as a species. There's other angles to sort of dig in on that. So, for example, where do they last appear separately, in the biological, in the fossil record, So those kind of things give you some sort of guidance, at least roughly when this happened, where it happened. But with things that are intellectual, if you want to talk about them as memes or elements of folklore, whatever, these little pieces of the story, these appear in multiple cultures, and this one is such a mishmash. And it's obvious that parts of it had to come from Europe, but parts of it came from tribal lore. But which tribes and when, hard to say. And then further complicating it is, it seems like the Cherokees version of the story might have come from the sort of northeastern tribes. But then the Cherokee get, and this is oversimplification, but they get dominated and ultimately mostly kicked out of the area of the Carolinas and Georgia during the Jackson administration. You get the Trail of Tears where they're driven out to Kansas. But during that period, that's the this is going to sound terrible, but I think a lot of people in Georgia considered the Cherokee to be, I'm air quoting, a civilized tribe, which is to say they had their own rules and ultimately even made their own newspapers. They had their own alphabet. They had, they were very much working through this European colonization process and blending in, and they were landowners. They had all these rights, and it was really, who knows how it might have turned out. But then famously, there was this really bad situation where, and that's a judgment call, but yeah, really bad, where basically some people in the Cherokee Nation sold the land illegally to the American government. There was a whole thing where the Supreme Court tried to stop Jackson from kicking everybody out, and Jackson was like, well, they can say that, but let's see them enforce it. It was bad. It was really bad. And then on the trail itself, lots of people died. And then I think there was one of those nights of revenge where the people who felt like their land had been stolen went around and revenge murdered the people who were involved. It's complicated. This is not a great history podcast. Generally I'm not prepared to talk about this as though this were a history class. I could just say that all of these pieces complicate the story of the Wampus Cat, and I want to be aware of that. So yeah. It's so complicated, and all of this is interwoven with the history of a lot of cryptids. It is. In fact, I think that's been kind of a recurring theme that we've kind of touched on, but I'm not sure exactly what to do with it. You've, off the record, we've talked about some ideas about how to address this, and I like those, but that's for the future. I'm not going to even hint at it, but this idea of, you just did. I guess that is hinting at it technically, but I don't think it's possible to have, that's a terrible way to start a sentence, isn't it? Anyway, but I mean, decolonizing cryptozoology is a tall order, right? And this is a good example of why, because in addition to the native folklores and myths of the Wampus Cat, there is a really robust folklore of the Wampus Cat coming out of the Scotch-Irish Appalachian community, where it is the story takes on the elements of European werewolf stories. So there's lots and lots of stories that involve a woman who lives apart. We might identify her as sort of a witch-type character. She's European, but she makes a deal with some entity and is given instructions on how to make a fur belt or a fur coat that she puts on and then becomes the Wampus Cat. Very, very werewolf-like. Very werewolf-like. And that version, I think there's a Twilight Zone that was written by Earl Hamner. Now, most people will probably know him from the Waltons TV show in the 70s. But Hamner also wrote a lot of sort of weird fiction stories as well, all set in Appalachia. For the most part. And he wrote one called the Witching Pool, but he also wrote one about a woman who turns into a big cat. And I think that one has some of these elements here. And then Manly Wade Wellman was another Appalachian folk writer from the Carolinas who also incorporated this. Again, the same sort of approach to the Wampus Cat, where he's got characters like Silver John and some others who, and I really like his stuff. I just read... They've recently put all his whole collection onto Audible. I tore through that. It was really fun. Paranormal. Cool. Yeah, I like those pulp stories. So, and another version I'd heard too was this woman was not a witch, but she was a woman belonging to a particular tribe. Sometimes it said the Cherokee people, and that she had tried to follow the men when they were on secret men's business and to go and witness what they were doing, and came across them during some kind of ritual or ceremony where they were performing magic, and she was caught and found out and then punished by being turned into this hybrid woman cat, half woman, half cat figure, and that was punishment for her. So it seems like there are a lot of different stories out there. And I guess we should talk a little bit more about the creature and what it is, because in some versions it's a cat, in some versions it's a feline creature of some kind, or it's a hybrid, half person, half woman in particular, half cat. I've heard of cases where it's supposedly has 3 pairs of legs. Yes. Yeah, it almost sounds like it's a centaur a part woman, part cat. But most of the depictions I've seen, and these are largely drawn from modern people who play video games and stuff. They draw it more. So for our listeners who know the Displacer Beast from Dungeons and Dragons, that if you saw the movie, that's a creature that shows up in the film. It's a 6-legged panther. I think it's 6. It might have 8, but it has tentacles on its back and teleports and stuff. So it's not quite that. But if you can imagine a 6-legged panther, and sometimes with more humanoid features in the upper torso.
And glowing gold eyes.
Yeah.
Like a cat would have anyway.
Yeah. I think that's the other thing is because it is itself a narrative hybrid, and its depiction involves hybridity. We get all kinds of elements all over the place geographically, depending on what the popular story. Oh, and it's also a sports ball team name. That's another thing. But down in Florida, they have they have Florida Panthers are real cats. They have like big cats, and then in other parts of the country, there used to be panthers, but they've been largely wiped out. And in the realms of how this kind of crosses over with the alien big cats in cryptozoology, there's in the state of Pennsylvania, for example, the Department of Natural Resources said that all of the large cats have been exterminated. But at least for the past 30 or 40 years, there's been a continuing online sort of argument that no, they're real, but the DNR is covering it up. So nobody's provided a sort of definitive proof of of their still being there. And there's nothing like a lot of alien big cats. A normal 4-legged big cat is not biologically implausible. It's about finding them in unusual areas where they're not supposed to be. That's right. That's what makes them alien. It's just that they're
alien to their environment.
Exactly. So
yeah. Well, there's probably out there somewhere the idea of an alien as in extraterrestrial cat as well.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean,
why not?
You remember when the chupacabra first started being reported? People claimed that. Well, they've also claimed this of Bigfoot that these are pets that got off the flying saucers, or
spaceships and
exactly.
Yeah, but certainly with the Wampus Cat, I've seen depictions of it being a panther, a black panther. Sometimes it's got stripes. Sometimes it's got spots. I looked up a few videos on YouTube as well of people claiming they've found it in the woods, and they usually look like tabby cats from a distance, and the perspective is kind of all out, and they look like normal cats.
Yeah, and I went back into
feral cats.
Yeah, I went into newspapers.com looking for stories about the Wampus Cat from 1850 to 1950, and there's actually quite a lot of them. They fall into the 1920s and 30s, people reporting hearing them and seeing them as real animals. These are very much like people in the newspapers reporting wild man stories and all kinds of other sort of unusual slow news days, we might call it. But not to go off on a
fast news day for people like us.
Well, yeah, no, exciting for us. But I ran into this thing where I went to newspapers.com, where I've been a happy subscriber for a long time and use it frequently on podcast research. And they've added a whole bunch more newspapers, but now they're offering tiered service. So like they want the subscriptions more than double to get to all the good articles. I'm so annoyed.
Wow.
So now
hopefully there's an alternative to that.
No, there's no alternative to capitalism. Are you crazy? Anyway.
Well, what I'm wondering is with these alleged sightings, how the bulk of them do seem to be in the 1850s through to the 1950s, as you looked up. And why is it that the sightings seem to peter out from that point, or are there continued sightings today? I mean, YouTube would tell me that people believe they're still seeing something out there. Yeah, no, people are still reporting them. I just think that in this modern age, it's more likely they're going to be reported as a traditional cat. It's like more like an ABC sighting in the UK. Yeah. I think even cryptozoologists have largely conceded that a hexapod feline is not lurking in the wilds of America. Like the six-leggedness of it definitely falls into what friend of the show, Joshua Cutchin, would call weird washing. It's like
we don't want to admit that, we're going to go and shave off those 2 extra legs we saw,
Yeah.
Like,
Well, I think in some versions too, if the creature didn't have 6 legs, it might have had 6 claws or, additional claws. Matt calls them a dew claw.
Oh, yeah. Or an escape clause. Yeah. What?
yeah, indeed. But yeah, it does seem like the bulk of sightings were around that period, and nowadays certainly it's evolved, and as you're mentioning, it's really evolved into popular culture, even to the point where the Wampus Cat is mentioned in Harry Potter.
That's right. As part of the, I believe it's part of the Strange Beasts and Where to Find Them, that whole sort of spin-off. They have, America has, or North America has, United States is what I'm trying to say, has a magic school of its own, and they talk about the Wampus Cat in there. And I think it might even be one of the houses, I believe. Like we have, Gryffindor. We have. What am I talking about? Like one Slytherin to another.
Part of our culture, yeah.
But one thing that I ran across that I found really fascinating was the Cherokee would incorporate the Wampus Cat idea with some dances and masks. And there was this idea of the booger mask. And it's just as a side read, this was really interesting. The masks are, they remind me a little bit of some of the masks that they have in Japanese stage. I don't know what that's called. There's a special name for it where like very cartoonish masks. And these were...
Yes, I know what you're talking about. I can't think of the word right now.
This is a gigaku mask.
Okay. It's
a very cartoonish kind of a mask, and I'm not sure exactly. It says expressive and comic in nature. I'll be honest. I first ran into these masks without knowing what they were in my casual reading. But the first time I saw them and thought, "What is that?" was they showed up in the cartoon series Demon Slayer, and there's a sword village where they make all the sword makers go to this one village and they wear these masks as part of their anonymity. But anyway, the booger mask of the Cherokee. This is made out of... Is
that the term that the Cherokee people use, a booger mask? Because kind of sounds...
It's European, like isn't it?
Man sounds European.
Exactly. And it is because the whole thing... The Cherokee would not have called them booger masks. That's what...
Probably not.
Right, but the Americans or the pioneer settler type people would have.
Right.
But the funny part is what they were used for. Okay, so here's the thing. Cherokee culture took a huge hit when it was forced to do the Trail of Tears and flee. So much, so they had Sequoia developed the alphabet. They had their own newspaper and all this sort of stuff. Yet these traditions of these masked dances and that stuff was suppressed by missionaries, and in a lot of the Cherokee converted to Christianity and sort of just
were herded into residential schools.
Yeah, it's like it's a cultural erasure. Is what it really is, right?
Yes, so, absolutely. Very sad.
So they know the booger masks were a thing, and they know what they were used for, yet they don't have explicit descriptions of how they were utilized, right? And but so these cartoonish masks made of gourd and fur and paint, they use them in ceremonies where the person wearing the mask would be an outsider. And they would come into the Cherokee figuratively through dance and do outrageously socially inappropriate things. And these sort of were mocking the Europeans.
Sounds like
it. And so
the missionaries.
Exactly. And so, I mean, they would do things like they would have a big coat, and then they would open their coat and have a water bladder and figuratively pee on the audience, that kind of thing. So things that were wildly inappropriate. Yeah, it's like that's a lot of stagecraft.
Like a flasher.
Yeah, exactly. But in a tribal setting that I really can't even begin to give context to. but the interesting thing is that the booger mask tradition, the making of the masks, has come back in Kansas, and there's people now teaching the craft And from what I understand, I haven't looked into this, but also trying to resurrect that figure and the dances and that sort of thing, which is, I think, necessarily going to sort of be like Wicca in that you're trying to construct a thing as though it were historically had continuity, but it doesn't. So, but who better to, redefine that than the Cherokee people themselves?
Absolutely, for them to do,
So it's a complicated topic.
This is just interesting how broad these beliefs and stories are and legends that. I mean, it seems like they kind of focused on the South, but that they have spread around the country.
Right.
And I'm wondering if this is, has this spread to Canada as well?
Well, they have the Mishipishu is, I think, Ojibwe. I hope I'm saying that right. That the Northeast, including in Canada, has the water panther belief system. Them earlier. But it's different from tribe to tribe. And it also is tied into things like some people think that the water panther fits into lake monsters, right? And so...
Yeah, I can see the crossover there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think some cryptozoologists would see the water panther as being part of that lake monster tradition, whereas the Wampus cat, like, even though I think it's tied to the same lore, is, you hear it, I've heard tale of it more in terms of a terrestrial cat, maybe living in the swamp, but you don't usually hear the Wampus cat described as being an underwater cat, at least down here.
I see. Yeah.
So there's a lot. This whole the indigenous lore is going to be different over time, over space, across tribes, and I'll add into that now we've got the internet helping mishmash this stuff even more, right? Like, so it's really complicated to just go looking this up online or on YouTube. There's just such a mishmash of stories and theories out there. It's really leveled, really strange. Yeah. But and it seems to be a real cultural relic today in a linguistic sense, where it's just used as an explanatory tool. Yeah. It's lost its identity. Like, it's all the sort of contextual things that would give it a meaning, for I think an easily understood meaning, have been stripped away, and so when it gets turned into a football team, that's you might just, well, it's a fierce animal, but like not understanding the actual significance of it.
Just to explain a weird noise.
And I have to add one more little place that's popped up, and I love this a lot, and that is, there's a computer game called Hunt the Wumpus. And it was developed in the very early 1970s, and it's a kind of a fun maze game. You're basically wandering around in a maze and trying to figure out if you can see the Wumpus, and if you can sort of shoot an arrow at it. But you only have a limited number of arrows, and if you land on the Wumpus, it'll kill you. So it's complicated. Oh. but there was a really wonderful computer game called M.U.L.E. with this M period, U period, L period, E period. I think it's this from memory. I think it was multiple use labor implement. And it was the idea was you go to a planet to colonize, and everybody has these multi-purpose mule things that they have to use to set up their farms. And so it's a colonization game on a foreign planet. And when you've finished all the tasks that you could do on your turn, you only have a limited amount of time. There is an extra bonus game where you can hunt the Wampus. You hunt the mountain Wampus. Now, that game was developed by Ozark Software, and which was, I think the head programmer was Dani Bunten. She's an interesting character herself. I can put a link in the show notes. But she made several games that are extremely important to me.
Are they from the South?
She was from Arkansas mostly, and she was, I think, born in Missouri, but spent most of her life in Arkansas. So, yeah, I think that the mountain Wampus sure sounds like the Wampus Cat to me. But you can catch the Wampus and get some extra cash for your game. It's a fun game. I can put a link to that as well. It's a brilliant game because you're colonists, and someone can definitely be a winner. But if anybody uses excessive capitalistic tendencies and like tries to steal, like make all the most money, but locks up all the resources, you may win the game by numbers, but the colony fails because you didn't allow enough resources to be spread among everyone, which I think is a brilliant,
very ahead of its
idea.
time.
Yes. No, it is a really good game for teaching about sort of capitalism can go bad. Like I don't have a better system in mind, but if you don't keep checks and balances, then greed will make everybody suffer. You know, one person will have enough money to buy everything and everybody else is just screwed.
Yeah,
so
we have seen that.
Yeah.
So one other thing occurred to me too. I've heard in some cases that the Wampus cat is actually a half dog, so it could be like a half dog, half cat. Have you heard of any?
I think those are cogs
versions?
or dats, right? Dats and cogs living together. No, I have not heard that. I did see that on an internet page, but I haven't seen it in. This is me being snooty, but I haven't seen it in a book.
Right.
So
well, yeah, I think it just reminds me of some native or some indigenous Australian creatures as well, that are a mix of the crocodile and birds and dogs and dingoes and things like that. So I just think in some versions they're really out there with the different variations of the creature, the beast.
Now, I would say if this conversation seems a little rambly, we were trying to get to a lot of information in a short amount of time. But when we talked to Tanya about this topic, this was what I was trying to explain. It's like I have so many complicated ideas about this, and there are so many complicated ideas about this topic that it was hard to kind of pick one and stick to it. So we've just done a quick, hopefully not too quick intro.
All over the place a bit, but I mean, I think we should delve into this further. Do a deep dive.
I think there's several sort of vectors to come out of this that we can sort of get further in on. And one of them is I'd like to understand why the water panther as a concept is so popular. Not popular is the wrong word. So widely common in the Northeast, and I'm suspecting that it would be easier to understand if I were seeing more folklore rather than the sort of post-cryptozoology interpretations of the folklore that I usually run into.
Right.
So finding someone who does folklore stories of those tribes as an oral tradition versus here's 25 cryptozoology books and how they try to tie, native lore into monster hunting. And that's, if you look at like the Eberhard encyclopedias, a ton of that book is that kind of a thing where they just take a native lore and say, that might be a real monster. That might be a real monster. I'm like, well, okay.
Right.
But maybe it's an important folklore and you shouldn't reduce it to is it a monster? Is it real kind of thing? Maybe there's more going on there. So.
For sure. Yeah. Well, we definitely need to delve into this further. And this is really just touching upon this, I think, because it came up within the context of our trip and it was, this is a fun idea. This is something we haven't discussed before.
Exactly.
And yet
go ahead.
We have had requests for this topic or similar topics.
Yes, and we will definitely be talking about these more. Anyway, I want to say thank you to Tanya and to the Jacksonville State University for having us out.
Yes.
We had such a wonderful
trip.
It really was.
Yeah,
and
it was great. And it was great to catch up with you again.
And I just want to give a little shout out to the Calhoun Steakhouse. I've been on a low carb diet for a long time, and
and they broke that.
I had their bread pudding, and it may be the finest dessert I've ever put in my mouth. It was so good. I
didn't get to try it, unfortunately, but you've been raving about it ever since. So
it's driving me crazy how good it is. It's only like it's less than a 2-hour drive to Jacksonville, and I'm already like telling Kathleen, it's like I wouldn't mind putting an audio book on. Exactly, I was going to throw an audio book on and drive and get us a bread pudding, for something. Yeah, I really
you can have to find a good recipe, I think.
Yeah, is the white chocolate. It's so good. It's so good. Anyway, okay. So enough of that. Anyway, thank you everyone for tuning into another episode.
Yes. Thanks for listening.
Monster Talk.
You've been listening to Monster Talk, the science show about monsters. I'm Blake Smith.
And I'm Karen Stolzno.
You just heard Karen and me discussing the complicated topic of the Wampus Cat and recounting our delightful visit to Jacksonville State University, Alabama. We will be diving deeper into indigenous lore in future conversations, so please stay tuned. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Monster Talk. Each episode, we strive to bring you the very best in monster-related content with a focus on bringing scientific skepticism into the conversation. If you enjoy Monster Talk, we now have a variety of ways to support the show, all with convenient links at monstertalk.org/support. That's monstertalk.org/support. We have links there to our Patreon page as well as a donation button. Another great way to support the show is to buy books from our Amazon Monster Talk wish list, which directly helps us with our research. We love used books very much, so don't feel compelled to buy new ones, and we love Kindle so we can share our digital libraries with each other. And finally, without spending any money at all, you can support us by leaving a positive review at iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Positive reviews help keep us visible in iTunes, which is a great way to help us find new listeners. And please share our show on your favorite social media platforms. Monster Talk theme music is by Pete Stealing Monkeys. And we've said it before, but it bears repeating. Keep off the moors! Oh, but also, thank you for listening.
This has been a Monster House presentation.